On November 30th of this month, I will have spent 28 years of my life as a CEO of the right place, and I think most of you know who we are. And my job is to retain jobs, to create jobs, and to attract jobs to this community and this region. And I'm very, very passionate about that because my belief is that a good job is the best social service that we can provide a person to support their family, to support their children, to go shopping, whatever they need to do. So I'm I take this very personally. And I really believe that the good Lord has put me here in this place to do exactly that, to manage this organization and to help create jobs for our citizens. Until I ran into the immovable object called a company called Electrolux in a small town called Greenville, Michigan, where they employed 2,700 people. And I think you know the rest of the story, but let me tell you the rest of the story. It is 2003, and word starts to trickle out that there may be a closure coming on. So just to remind everybody, Greenville, Michigan is about 50 miles to the north of here. It is a small community that at one time was called Refrigerator City, USA. The Gibson Company had started in the early 1900s a company there that grew into the largest refrigerator-making company in the world, and at one time employed 6,000 people in a plant of 1 million square feet in Greenville, Michigan. In the 1970s, things started to change. The company was sold a number of times, and in the 1980s, it was owned by White Westinghouse and then eventually by Electrolux. And that's where the story starts to change, because the 80s became also a very difficult time for economic development. We started to go from a quality of place, quality of workplace, quality of product, commercial mentality to a lowest cost mentality. Let's race to the bottom and make it in the cheapest places where we can. And particularly the southern states, who are our competitors in these days and still are today, came to the north, to Illinois, to Michigan, to Indiana, to tell our companies, go south. It's cheaper, no labor unions, et cetera, et cetera. So everything changed, and this is where the game started changing in the mid-'80s and early '90s for the plant in Greenville as well. Slowly, things had started draining away, but we still had 2,700 people working in Greenville at that time. And in 2003, rumors started trickling out that they were going to close the plant and move to Mexico. Still happening today to some companies, but the city of Greenville would have been devastated. And so the city manager, George Bozanic, great guy, put together a task force, community leaders, business leaders, the union, and put a task force together to say, what can we do to save these jobs, to talk to the company, talk some sense into them, what can we do? I was not at that time directly involved in this project because I was really more responsible for Kent County. And yet George would call me almost on a weekly or sometimes daily basis and say, we're planning on doing this, can you help me dealing with a multinational, et cetera. And I would give him advice, so I was sort of in the background, a consultant. And then one day I had a chat with a gentleman by the name of Fred Meyer. He happens to be Greenville's most favorite citizen. That's where the Meyer family started. And he said, what are you doing about helping us, those folks up there? And I said, well, Fred, I haven't really been invited to the party. He says, I'm inviting you to the party. Here's a check. Go up there and help them save those 2,700 jobs because that community really needs it. So I became part of the task force. In the meantime, Governor Granholm had joined the task force as well. And we started meeting in the community center in Greenville downtown all through 2003 into the fall of 2003. And I realized very early on that we had some serious hurdles to overcome. Greenville, as many of you know, is not in a logistically very good location. It's a little difficult to get there. The plant is 1 million square feet of hodgepodge. You know, some of the buildings are still up there. They're 100 plus years old. And there's a union up there that isn't particularly beloved by the company. So we had all of those hurdles to overcome, and yet, you know, I'm like, you know, we can do this. Let's put our heads together. Let's start figuring out a plan. What is our plan to put in front of the company? So we started talking to the plant manager and said, can you let me in the plant and allow us to go take a look through there? It was a hodgepodge. It was terrible. Logistics was awful. We talked a local architect and a local builder into working with us and taking a look of how we could realign and build a new plant. The state of Michigan put up $121 million in cash and tax incentives to help build the plant. And we talked to the union who would be willing to settle for keeping 1,200 jobs versus 2,700 jobs. We knew that quite a few of these people were going to retire. And we did a cost-benefit analysis knowing that if we built them a 500,000 square foot plant with 1,200 people, we could absolutely compete on cost with Mexico. So in the fall of 2003, we started meeting with the folks from Electrolux North America. They're headquartered in Augusta, Georgia. And I cannot tell you how frustrating it was sitting across the table from them and reading their body language and putting everything we had on the table. 121 million, the union was willing to make concessions, a brand new plan for 500,000 square feet. We knew we had the numbers right, and they were feeling, like giving us lip service. And yet I couldn't let really go. It was like, what else can we do? We met through the entire winter. The governor came through almost every meeting. And we kept upping the ante, we kept massaging the deal. We eventually came to the conclusion, let's go to Stockholm. Let's go to Electrolux directly and talk to the leadership there. Put the governor, me, and the mayor on the plane. Thanks very much, but no thanks, was the reply. But still, it was like, we cannot give up. We met through snowstorms. They would fly up from Georgia. We would meet. Everybody would talk about the deal. How can we sweeten the pot? How can we compete? We kept upping the ante, and we kept always getting really nice. This is really good. Really nice feedback. Yes, and by this time it's Christmas, and 2,700 people are wondering if they have a job for Christmas or if they don't have a job for Christmas. And they had a job for Christmas, and we kept on talking to them. By this time, I should have known that this is almost over, and we should have started looking at alternatives. But every time I drove home from Greenville, I was like, there has to be something else. There has to be something else. By the dint of will, there has to be a way of saving 2,700 jobs. And by the way, 2,700 jobs of that magnitude really are more like 5,000 jobs, because every one of those jobs has a factor of 1.8 to 2 of ancillary jobs that happen at a Meijer store or the grocery store, other grocery stores, et cetera. So we were really talking over 5,000 jobs. And on January the 9th, we got a notice that the company was going to make an announcement, and then they pulled the announcement. And it was like, you must be kidding. So is this a reprieve? Do we have another chance? No, they were playing games. And so on January the 16th, 2004, the announcement was made that no matter what we did, the deal wasn't good enough, Mexico was cheaper, we're leaving. This was one of the worst days in my career, if not the worst, because there was everything that I could have done, I did. The community did everything they could have done. The governor did everything they could have done. And no matter what we did, it wasn't good enough. And so 2,700 people walked out there one day in late January. The doors closed on the building, and that was it. And even 11 years later, I'm not over it. And last year, we placed a company up there from China with 300 jobs and $140 million of investment. And yet the first question out of the mouth of the press was, what about Electrolux? So it's almost in the DNA of the community that is still not quite over this. And to add insult to injury, the company is not happy in Mexico. I found out from a West Michigan CEO who sits on the board with one of their executives that it hasn't worked out the way they had anticipated, and that the next plant that they will build will go to Anderson, South Carolina. And I will never buy an Electrolux product. Thank you.